Hello, I'm Theresa Skorseth. We're back with our discussion of church versus state, and we have the pleasure of having the same panel of guests. This is Retha Dooley Herb Davis. This, of course, is Robin Hensel, and I'm Theresa Skorseth. We're here to try to make some sense of the relationship between church and state, whether it ought to exist and how it ought to exist. But we actually have already sort of gotten started on a conversation about the wonders of nature and whether that proves the existence of God or argues for the existence of God or not. And Robin, you posited something about the wing of a fly, as I recall.
I did, and I'll be happy to take it up from there, but would you read that first from Eisenhower? Because I think that's important.
I'll have to find it again. President Eisenhower in 1953, as he was winding down the war in Korea, wrote, or spoke probably in a speech, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, a theft from those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hope of its children. The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities. It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 people. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals. It is some 50 miles of concrete highway. We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat. We pay for a single destroyer with enough homes to have housed more than 8,000 people. This, I repeat, is the best way of life to be found on the road the world has been taking. This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron." Eisenhower, 1953.
Well, I'd like to ask how a person would explain all the wonders, and like you said, all the marvels. If not created by a God, then how would a person ever explain that?
And the answer is, you go to a scientist who has already answered almost every question that you could conceive of. You brought up flies' wings and the intricacies of butterflies or whatever. There are people who devote their entire lives to studying, the entomologists, I think they call them, that would be able to tell you that this fly is actually not a creation of a creator. This fly is an outgrowth of previous flies who were mutated, and probably be able to tell you the family history in terms of which flies bred before to produce this new mutant fly, or this new mutant form of butterfly. The concept's called evolution. It's the obvious biggest threat to many people's view of creation. Obviously, scientifically verified for almost, I would say, 99.99% of the world's population that bothers to study evolution. You can say, I don't believe that this is a coffee cup or a white cup, but that doesn't change the reality that it is a white cup. So how would I explain it? The same way we explain to people that you wouldn't fall off the face of the earth. You know, when you got to the edge, you just keep going. It's not really flat after all, even though they believed that, you know, at one point, and that was the existing science. We're not at the end of having resolved every issue. Not every single thing can be explained, but we're down to the atoms within the double helix DNA molecule, so we're getting pretty far down the road to being able to explain. And most scientists, I think, would tell you that we have explained the origin of the planet and all life on it. And they would also add, it's arrogant to think that we're the only planet with life on it.
Yeah, that's my belief, is that if there's this plane, why wouldn't there be another? And that is, I don't wanna say an argument, but that is reason to believe in another level, another plane, another existence, like the hereafter.
Excuse me, but nah, it's not reason. It allows you to believe something you'd like to continue to believe, but it's not a reason that would encourage me or anyone else to believe that. It's just something that gives you an opening to say there must be another level, because we don't understand.
I'd like to run by you an experience that my grandma shared with me, that reaffirmed my belief in an afterlife, another life after death. She was really ill. I lived in Florida for a period of my life, for about 2.5 years, and I came home a couple of times when she was really ill. And she recalled to me an event, and I think I'm the only one that she ever told this story to, till now. She was really ill and near death. And she knew she was near death. She was lying in her bedroom, in her bed, and she had a great big oak chest at the end of her bed. And my grandma was a firm believer in prayer, but she wasn't somebody who believed you had to believe a certain way in order to get to heaven, or call yourself a Christian. She believed in more inclusive faith than that. But she told me that she knew she was dying, and she felt and saw herself lift out of her body and elevate and float over towards the dresser. When she got as far as the dresser, she was praying all along the way, and her prayer was this, that God would not take her life just yet because she had more seeds to plant. And it was at that moment she finished that prayer that she got as far as that dresser, when she was immediately back in her body. Well, my grandmother was a completely honest person, and I feel a really rational person, and would have had no reason to make that up. What other explanation could there be than what she was recalling?
Well, I don't want to insult your grandmother, or you. And we are getting kind of far away from church versus state issues. But I will tell you that if you go to an insane asylum, you will find, and we don't have insane asylums anymore, so you have to go to a state hospital where we've got people on various levels of drugs, etc. You will find people that can convince you that they have a magic friend, much like little children have magic friends. And some of them believe it with their whole heart and soul. And if my grandmother told me that kind of a story, I would think that my grandmother was really getting old, that her brain was not functioning in a normal, healthy manner. I wouldn't try to explain why, because I'm not a neurologist, but I would guess that if you took a scan or an MRI of my grandma's brain, after she told me that story, you would find that Grandma had all kinds of lesions on her brain, that she was in a different state than she was when she was in her reproductive years. You asked for an explanation, so I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate
That's as
your
close
answer.
as I can come to an honest civil explanation.
Well, and I'll just share an experience, a couple of them actually, because they are more on your end of the spectrum than on Herb's end of the spectrum. When my father was a young man, his father was dying, and his mother asked him to run into town to find the doctor and to bring him back to the home. And he said he ran as fast as he could to town, and he went everywhere, and he looked for the doctor, and he couldn't find the doctor. And so he was running back home to tell his mother that he couldn't find the doctor. And he said, all of a sudden, there was this beautiful woman in this gorgeous carriage being carried forward by 4 beautiful white horses. And she said to him, there's no need to hurry, son. And he said he knew at that moment that his father had passed away. And indeed, when he got home, his father had passed away. Now, how does one explain that sort of thing? I have no idea. And I'll just tell you another instance that was similar. And then I do have a quasi explanation for all of that. In 1976, my father was dying. And he was in the hospital at Mercy Hospital. I was living in South Minneapolis, and I got a phone call on a Friday night to come as quickly as I could because my father was dying. And I didn't think I would be able to make it there quickly enough, so I called my brother, who then, and I told him to get there as quickly as he could. So he did. He left and I left, and so I'm driving along the River Road to Coon Rapids to the Mercy Hospital, and I'm stopped at a light, and there's a vehicle in front of me, and it had a bumper sticker on it, and that bumper sticker said, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away." And I knew at that moment that my father had died. And I continued my way to the hospital. As I walked into the hospital, Father Reiser and my brother were just coming down and getting off the elevator, and they said, "Oh, Dad's gone," and I said, "I know." So about a week later, I saw that bumper sticker on another vehicle. And what it really said was, "The Lord giveth and Uncle Sam taketh away." And so what I took from that is that I find what I need to find when I need to find it. So I knew my dad was terribly, terribly ill. I knew that he was dying. And I also felt that I needed some confirmation that he knew that I was on my way and that I just couldn't get there in time. And so that's what I saw.
Mysteries
Can I
happen.
add something?
And yes, please.
There is an institute called the James Randi Institute, and he has, for about the last 30 years, I think, I might be wrong, it might be 40, he has offered $1 million reward to anyone who can reproduce any paranormal event. If you're running seances to speak to the dead, or you can get people to come back to life, or you can cure things, etc. All you have to do is prove reproducible evidence that can be scientifically verified, and there's $1 million prize. And there have been thousands of people who have tried, most of them basic magicians, and no one has collected yet. And the reward is still out there, and his name, Randi, R-A-N-D-I, is still available, James Randi Institute.
He was a magician himself, wasn't he? At some
I
point?
don't know the answer to that.
I believe he was, and then he found himself resenting the sloppiness of other magicians because they weren't holding him in thrall as he felt they should. And so that got him into the whole question of what's real, what's not, where does belief come into the deal, how is it that some people can manipulate others by preying on certain aspects of their personality. Very interesting man with a very interesting $1 million prize to offer for anyone who can do that. But I started to say we have, we're all faced with mysteries at some point in our lives, and we are absolutely free as the birds in the air to interpret those mysteries however we choose, because they're ours and they're ours only, you know? And it's and I think most people do as you did, Retha. We decide that we find what we need, the answers that we have to have come to us when we have to have them. And I understand your grandmother's position. I've had some astral travel experiences where I was literally soul traveling. So I know that can happen. But I don't know that anybody is ever going to come up with proof nobody's ever gonna win that $1 million. And if it even exists, it may not. It's easy to promise something you know you'll never have to pay off.
I have a question I'd like to ask you, Herb, and that is, if tomorrow, everyone that has a faith in a deity were to stop, do you think that would help mankind and civilization or hurt?
Stop believing.
Yeah. Just stop, all of a sudden just
I
get
believe
convinced
what you
that-
believe. Of course it would help. We would stop immediately our rush to climate catastrophe. We would end war. We would spend the money that Eisenhower's talking about on those airplanes on things that are beneficial to human life. Of
So,
course I believe that all of the world's problems would go away. We would put all of that intellectual, the millions of intelligent, brilliant nuns, the millions of monks, the millions of priests, the millions of religious scholars would be applying their mind to something else if that thing could stop. But instead, they're dealing with, did your grandmother's dream mean anything? And sure it did mean something. It sure as hell means something to you, I'm sure. Or to the people who have heard that, that's a pretty good dream, I mean, I liked it, enjoyed it. But my belief, you asked me the question, wow. I mean, that would be a dream come true for a rational human being. Because I believe that even though they have crazy ideas, and I mean insane ideas, call them faith, that they're really basically good people. And if they weren't wrapped up in crazy ideas, they wouldn't spend money on bombers. They wouldn't make all the people in the lowlands into refugees. They wouldn't make drought continue. They'd fight catastrophic climate change. And I still think we have a chance to save 3 or 4 billion lives. But on the rate that we're on right now, I think we're into 5 or 6, maybe 7 billion lives that are going to be taken through climate change. And almost to a person, I was going to say man, but almost to a person, climate change deniers are people of faith. I call them insane. And they are standing in the way of my grandson having a decent life by saying, oh, God's got a plan and everything will work out and there's going to be a rapture and you're going to be left behind her.
which brings about then, is the church at fault for most of the problems that exist in this world?
Are you trying to set me up or are you trying to tell me something?
No, because I believe that's true.
No, of course it's true. It is, and I don't blame just the church. I mean, if you say the church, it's the, whatever they call them, the muftas and the rabbis and the priests and the ministers. I don't blame those people specifically for all the problems in the world. I blame every little mother and father and aunt and uncle that teaches fantasy and bullshit to their children and grandchildren so that those kids can't think correctly. I mean, the people in Todd and Morrison County are ignorant and incapable of understanding catastrophic climate change. They've just been subjected to a fantastic con. And that con benefits some people to the extent of $1 million Learjets. That con benefits some people to a extremely great retirement early in life in a little commune by the highway, not too far from here, where they can play the piano and sing songs and have one hell of a great life while other people are suffering.
That's interesting. I'm glad that you gave that answer.
I'm glad that you're glad, because I'm glad you asked.
It is a very good question. It makes me think of John Lennon's song, Imagine.
Mhm.
You know, imagine there's no religion, no heaven, no hell below us, above
My
us in
favorite
the
song.
sky. Yes, he just nailed it. He said, if you take that out of the equation, you're left with people who are on a level, all on the same level. Nobody has the keys to some kingdom. Everybody's in it
I
together.
would just say one more thing about
Yes.
John Lennon. There's a poster that John Lennon and Yoko Ono put together, and the statement is, "War is over," and in small letters underneath, if you want it. And the reality is, we don't want it, we want our little fantasy.
And that was back in the 70s.
Yeah, we want our fantasy because it feels good to have, somebody I can pray to make Robin behave. You know?
It's absolutely
Funny you
necessary.
should say behave, because my next question was, what then, if not faith, to polish a person's humanness?
Very well put. Good question.
Take a look at me. Go ahead, analyze me, figure me out. I think I am the living proof. I mean, I am a decent human being.
Okay.
I'm not perfect.
But
I'm
how?
trying to get better.
And then how?
And I'm way, way, way better than I ever was before.
How? I would agree. You're one of the most moral persons I've ever known.
Too.
But how? What form of sandpaper are you using?
To get better,
Yeah.
trial and error. I read.
Self-examination.
I read.
Self-examination.
Self-examination.
And certainly self-examination is a part of it, but, you know, that's the least productive part of the whole thing. I mean, I think it's a very necessary part, but it's the least productive, because if I wanted to really know what was the matter with me, I'd go talk to my ex-wife. You know, she
She's
knows
got
what's
the
the
book, chapter,
matter.
and verse on that.
She knows what's the matter with me. You know, I just work on the things that cause me consternation or difficulty or whatever else. But truly, the concept of can you be good without God? When I go to those peace demonstrations, I meet these people and I think to myself, if there was no God, they'd still be out here.
Yeah.
These are the kind of people that believe peace is important enough to protest for. And I feel like I'm almost in church when I go there, to be honest with
I'd
you.
agree.
I would too.
That, you know, it's whatever, the closest thing I've got to a spiritual experience, to be in the company of this old bearded guy from up north that comes down all the time in his pickup truck.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Larry
talking
Fisk.
about? But the reality is that he's a fine human being.
Mm-hmm.
If he had his choice between a new Corvette and social justice or peace on earth, you know, he'd go for the social justice piece.
Right. See, and amongst those people that are at those peace vigils are also truth tellers and whistleblowers. Also some of the finest people of all. So let's pretend for a moment there is no organized religion.
Let me just say you're highly qualified.
You what?
What for what?
Yeah, let's pretend for a while. I just wanted to say, you're highly qualified to get into that, let's pretend.
Well,
I'm willing to go along with it.
I can think of one particular project that's actually taking place now, has been for a while, and I don't know the history of this exactly, but it's called the Venus Project. And I don't know this guy's philosophical or his faith view or lack of faith view, whatever. You know, you've heard of the Venus Project in Florida. And for those people who don't know about this project, it is a design for humanity that's different than what we have. Different housing, different growing of agriculture, a whole different system of living together. And it's a much more wise type. And look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about, the Venus Project. then if there were no organized religion, would something like that be the best replacement? Or need there not be a replacement then at all? Then it would just be a journey of self improvement, or that wasn't the word you used.
Examination.
Self-examination going forward that would polish or refine us as human beings.
The problem with that whole question is that it starts out being a few really good people with a great idea, and within a generation, it's a church. It's a cult. Somebody's on top and everybody else is serving that individual from below knee level.
No, do you belong, I'm assuming, or read atheist material or some group that associates with atheism? Is that right? Or agnosticism or humanism, something like that?
It describes rational human beings, yes. I belong to that group,
Do you meet regularly?
yes.
Okay.
Now, do you think that that's true, what she just said, that it would, if that group were to continue to expand and encompass all those, or the majority of people who are now considered in the faith community that have a faith based on Islam or Judaism or Christianity or Buddhism, whatever, that group that didn't acknowledge there was any kind of higher power would morph into a church?
No. No, there's no evidence for that, in my opinion. Certainly some groups that start out with an idealistic plan end up morphing into religions, but I'll just use Sweden and Norway as examples, you know. They have become pretty rational or humanistic, and instead of everybody going to church on Sunday, they're more likely to go help a widow re-roof her house on Sunday or Saturday or whatever day they choose to get together. But no, I don't think that that's the case. You know, I think that before we had education, before we had such a great understanding of our origins, I mean, you know, we could see the fetus at 5 days. I mean, you could see little blobs and identify what part of that little blob is the head. We can see, before all of that, it was easy to believe that God impregnated Mary. You know, that made sense because everything about childbirth was a kind of a mystery. You know, and even growing up in St. Paul, there were people that were married and had children that didn't understand the menstrual cycle and ovulation and things like that. So, no, I think we're way too far scientifically advanced to regress back into that. I'm not sure that there are enough of us that are scientifically advanced to escape the death throes of catastrophic climate change that's being brought upon us by the faith-based community.
Do you think it's possible to penetrate people's intellectual ability to think rationally, to get enough people convinced to stop believing in what you consider myth and superstition, to ever get to that level?
Before catastrophic climate change takes us down to less than 1 billion people on the planet? Probably not.
That or a nuclear holocaust?
You know, I've got a lot of confidence we've managed the nuclear holocaust pretty well for a long time, you know, half a century or so, but we have not come to grips with the reality of catastrophic climate change. And let me just stop you right here, because you can't imagine. I respect you. I respect all three of you. And to have people saying to you, do you think, do you think, do you think, you know, compliments my ability to have the right answer sometimes. I'm not sure I have the right answer. I'm just absolutely 100% sure that you don't, and that the Muslims don't, and that the Jews don't, and the Satanists don't. That part I'm 100% I'm an authority on rational science and humanism. In my own mind, I'm an authority. I'm really not. I mean, if you wanted to get a spokesperson for atheism, I'm not the one. I mean, they got Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and all the big name atheists, you know. But the reality is that it is much more convenient, even if you know that this is all myth and superstition, to say, I believe there could be a creator and I'm really not sure. And as an agnostic who really doesn't know one way or the other, I'll continue to worship. And that's, I think, where the vast majority of intelligent human beings are right now, that they're not stupid enough to believe in a virgin birth or the resurrection or any of the other myths, you know, about Noah's Ark or whatever else. But they're also not strong enough to come out and say, I flat out don't believe what everybody else believes. And the reason that they're not strong enough is that they understand history. They burned people at the stake. They drowned witches. They cut people's heads off today in Saudi Arabia, you know, kind of one of our big allies. But there's some fear involved. I mean, when I was coming over here today, I thought to myself, would I bring up that there is fear for me to come here? But it would be irrational not to acknowledge my fear. But I'm coming from what I consider a hotbed of Christianity, which is Todd County, to a hotbed of the craziest Christians in the state. Seriously, in Morrison County. And when I say that, I think to myself, I don't know if they would kill me over having that opinion, but there's a reason those anti-Muslim people were welcomed into the churches in Morrison County. Mm-hmm. This is a different part of the world. I mean, if you go to Berkeley or Minneapolis or even St. Cloud,
yeah.
This is pretty conservative territory. And when I say conservative, I say radical right. You know?
And I think
Scary.
that it isn't the Christian church that exists here or in Todd County. It is the so-called Christian church. I don't think...
What is the difference?
The
Your
difference,
opinion?
Yeah, that would be.
well, yeah, and I have a right to an opinion
Right. No, I
associated with my experience and my knowledge of my travels within that so-called Christian church or experience. The churches that I attended, except for the one, and very few people in that church under Dr. Rowland Robinson, would I consider even close to being a true Christian. My experience with the so-called Christian church anywhere in this 4 or 5 county area isn't real. It's a phony, baloney, their own version of what they believe are so-called Christian values.
And I don't want to argue that I have a different opinion. That they are the Christian church. It is a many-faceted thing. There are some of the people that you have met and I have met that are Christians that are what you would call Christ-like. Here in Little Falls, you know, there are those people. There's no doubt in my mind. And there are those who are the other extreme of those people. They're worse than any non-believer I ever met, you know, but they say they're Christians. And there's a whole vast pool in between. But this is Christianity. And when you go to the state capitol, the Senate Majority Leader is the Christian product of this area.
But how can that be? I disagree with that because I think maybe a better term would be they are Old Testament churches that adhere more to Old Testament than New Testament.
That would be something you'd have to research in order to be able to say that with real confidence. Let me say this. I agree with Herb that it is not legitimate to call people whose Christianity doesn't resemble your Christianity so-called Christians.
Well, I'm not even relating to what I believe. If you look at what Christ, the red letters in Scripture, if people that are attending the churches that are calling themselves Christian actually adhere to that value, they would be considered outcast completely. They'd be spat on and probably killed.
Here's how it works for me. I don't think of Jesus as being the person that Christianity follows.
But it's
Jesus
supposed
is a
to
whole,
be.
no, I know, but it never has been, not since the first century. Jesus is a person completely above and beyond any of the crap that we slog through all the time. We can call ourselves Christians, we could call ourselves anything we like. It's not going to change who we are at bottom, which is, for most of us, a pretty shaky proposition. And you have to give people the right to call themselves what they think they are. If what they think they are is Christian, that's what they are. Then what you do is you look at their Christianity and you say, well, what is Christianity then? If it just means that you warm a pew once a week, throw some money in the can, and live exactly as you please every other day, if that's Christianity, I don't want any part of it.
Well, that's what you just stated, and what the church does or doesn't do is an argument for that maybe there shouldn't be a church at all.
Okay.
Let me
I go
just
for that.
jump in here and say that what we're really having right now is a theological discussion that I'm not quite sure we were prepared for. I think the focus really is church versus state,
Right.
a local
You're
view. Right. And let's get back to how does the church affect or not affect government, and how do we try to pull church back from government?
Can I just say that I believe that that's what I was talking about?
Yeah, I think we have to get the terms.
Yeah,
Yes.
when I said
Solidified.
that I believe that if we are operating on your faith in your tablets are as good as my faith and my angel, then we're dealing with irrational stuff. And that it all comes down to the thinking. If we have these, what I call irrational beliefs that we can't verify, then we have people making decisions that have poor thinking skills.
So
Those poor thinking skills make many of them think we should probably buy more tanks and airplanes and ships than houses, roads, and hospitals.
And we should frack the tar sands, and we should
Sure.
dig oil wherever we can find it, and yeah.
No, I think we are on that.
Okay.
But I understand that Robin keeps bringing us back to Christianity and faith and mystical stuff,
But I think that's important. I think we need to nail that down, or we don't really know what
you
we're talking
can't
about when we talk
nail
about.
that down.
Well, we can at least get to the point where we agree on some basic
It
terminology.
would be interesting to me if you ever get there.
I think it's worth a try.
Well, I want to share with the viewers the reason that I wanted to have this discussion, this very public discussion amongst four of us. We're going to be inviting in more people. Theresa hopes to recruit some of the clergy to come and join us, to give their perspective. But what spurred me to do this was my experience with the quote-unquote Christian church in this area and other areas of Minnesota. That's been my background, but also in that the church, meaning in this context now, this conversation, this sentence right here, the church I'm referring to as the Christian church is going to have to wrestle really soon with the issue of Islam, because Muslims have just as much right to their belief in myth and superstition, or their faith, whichever one wants to refer to it as do the Christians in this area. And that influence in government, as well as Christian influence and Judaic influence in government, we're all going to have to address at some point in the future. Paul Gazelka, who is one of our representatives here, stated in an article in the Morrison County Record, I think it was after his, maybe it was in his pre-election, during his campaign, that he's a graduate of Oral Roberts University. He went there for a business administration degree, I believe. But he wanted a Christian perspective along with that business administration degree. Is one of our leaders now, down in St. Paul.
Senate Majority Leader.
And Ron Krisha is also the minority whip, I believe. And they have, I think, a fairly strong religious view or faith or whatever they want to call it or you want to call it. That's going to influence government. And some of the churches, not only here but throughout the world, are dominionist, and they have 7 pillars to the meat of their beliefs. And one of them is attaining government status, being able to have the power within government. It's not an option. It's like a command within the dominionist thinking.
Can I make 2 comments?
Sure.
Number 1, I am really glad I'm as old as I am because I'm not going to live to see the day in all likelihood. And 2, I think catastrophic climate change will have to be dealt with before our government gets around to quote unquote dealing with the Islam issue.
Or it's all gonna be moot anyway.
Well, I think it's moot already, to be honest with you. It's moot for the vast majority of humanity that is alive today. And for the next generations that are not born, it is truly moot, in my opinion.
So which is the more important subject then to vigil for? Peace or
Catastrophic climate change?
sustenance of the earth to keep saving the planet?
In my opinion, there is no contest. I mean, it's the concept of climate change is going to make whatever we do or don't do irrelevant. I mean, the whole concept, if we decide right now that we're going to get off oil, we're still going to have catastrophic climate change. Okay, if we get off oil right now, Retha and I launched a program called Cowspiracy. One of the things we could do environmentally right now is to 100% stop beef, period. The most polluting thing, more than automobiles. Mm-hmm. And can't 100% stop driving because we live too far away from each other. Mm-hmm. But we could 100% stop beef. And we're not even talking about it. And to talk about it, got Oprah Winfrey lined up in court with 200 lawyers on her side and 400 lawyers on their side, and they settled with, I'll shut up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it came down to. We're not going to talk about it, we'll just let it come. It is conceivable that a crazy man or a crazy group, call them the Taliban or whatever you want to call them, ISIS, could get the nuclear capability to fry us all, but I don't think so. But I'm absolutely 100% convinced that we're going to have climate catastrophe.
Do you think the church is capable of handling that topic if they really wanted to? If they got convinced somehow that regardless of it was their faith that got them deterred into thinking something other than about climate change, Do you think the church has the capacity and the intellect within it to be able to tackle that issue if they chose to want to do that?
Well, I guess I'd say if I had to pick yes or no to that answer, I'd go no. Do they have the intellectual capacity in there to make all of the right decisions? Yes. But they would have to give up a seriously comfortable retirement, most of them. And the Pope would have to fly coach. You know, no more gold, no more castles, no more manservants, no more little altar boys, etc. for Catholicism. And I don't think that's going to happen. They enjoy what they've got going way too much to ever admit that it's a con.
And the story reinforces itself. I mean, the story, the faith story reinforces itself. You almost don't have to defend it, although a lot of people spend a lot of time and money defending God and the story of their church. But it's self-perpetuating. If you're going to go to hell if you don't believe, if that's the premise, well then, you win.
Yeah.
You know.
Only if parents do that to their children so that they actually believe there is a. But the whole concept of God used to be similar to Santa Claus. The whole concept of God knowing if you're good or bad and you being punished in purgatory, hell, or whatever, eternal damnation, whatever they want to call it. That whole concept is a convenient tool for parents to use on their children. You know, Santa Claus doesn't come about just because the capitalists want it to happen. It works great. You know, it's much like inheritance. You know, if you want your children to love you, be rich. They will do what you tell them. If you've got not a dime to leave them, except a couple of bills, then you'll find out how much your children really love you. Inheritance works. I'm not saying there's no love in the world. I don't want to make that sound like I think that the only thing going for people is the wealth and the power. But certainly with Santa Claus, it's not just a capitalist tool. Christmas isn't just something that we make a big deal of because we believe in Jesus Christ or we want more marketing in 10 days than they have the whole rest of the year.
Maybe it's really a question of how far we can stretch our imaginations. I mean, when John Lennon was talking about a world with no religion and no politics and no agencies trying to get the better of anyone else, and everyone being equal, that's a stretch of the imagination. I have a really hard time holding that idea in my head. Because what we're used to, not just in our generation, but the generation before and all the way back as far as we know how to go, it's always been the powerful and the poor.
Bringing this sort of to church and government. Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. is a highly respected institution. As a young Catholic boy, Notre Dame, West Point, and Georgetown were places that I thought I really wanted to go. Until I figured out I wasn't intelligent enough to get a scholarship there, and I couldn't play football well enough to get beyond St. Thomas. You know.
Plenty of stupid people who couldn't play football went through those schools. That was
Yeah.
money talking, but,
Right.
but go on.
But anyway, those people, the Jesuits, produced most of our CIA.
Really? Okay.
When you look at the number of Catholics on the Supreme Court, that's not an accident. When you look at the number of Catholics and certainly good Christians in the CIA, that's not an accident. And you get to the less respected or whatever kinds of things, and it's still not an accident. In many cities, I'll just use New York as an example, if they have 35,000 cops in New York, which is an astronomical number, but I'm guessing that they got probably 34,000 of them are Christians.
Yeah.
And that's not an accident. And if you go to Camp Ripley or go to your local armory for a monthly meeting or whatever, you'll find that's loaded with Christians. So we're not talking much separation between church and government if you're talking church being Christians. If you want to see church and military separation, there aren't many Jews in the military.
In the military.
That's not the place they go to. You might find them in some other professions, financial management being one of them, but the reality is that we're not very separated at all, and the beliefs of eternal damnation, etc. An interesting part of separation of church and state. There isn't that.
They're completely enmeshed.
Well, again, I don't know if Robin brought it up or you brought it up, but you have two of the most Christian fellows in the legislature, and they happen to be two of the most powerful people in the legislature. And if they choose to, 15 years from now, they will be millionaires. If they're not already, I don't know if they are or not. But the reality is that you don't become a powerful person in our government and then just waltz off to a $60,000 a year job with 2 weeks off in the summer.
Very good point. Very good point. And that could get us into term limits and retirement packages for senators and Congress people, which would be a whole other show, and we don't have all that much time. Anybody have any closing thoughts they'd like to share? You've been kind of quiet, Retha.
Well, you know, I go back to, it's not a person's faith that makes them behave well. I don't believe. I believe it is the person who is willing to spend some introspective time. That really is, that we're self-governing. We really are. We can choose to be self-governing. Not everybody is self-governing, but we can choose that. Just because you're not a Christian doesn't mean you don't do good things or that you are not a good person. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I just have to consider love as the overall principle.
Correct.
I'd be interested because all three of you are mothers, have been in your life. If you thought that the whole concept of naughty and nice, heaven and hell, were tools that you could use in the rearing of your children, and if you inspired in your children a belief in mythology and things that they can't prove, then why you did it? Did you do it knowingly, or did you just waltz into making them little believers?
No, I didn't encourage my children to believe at all. But the neighbors took them to church, not against my will.
Mm-hmm.
It was always, okay, if you want to go, you go. And from that, they got a fundamental understanding of Christianity, and I'm not unhappy about that, because if you're going to be in this world, you kind of need to know how that works, just to function. You don't need to follow it, however. And I have one daughter who's an atheist and another who's a Christian. So go figure.
Well, I think there's a similarity between faith and conscience and the exercise of a conscience. Ironically, because my conscience has caused me to do a lot of the things that I've done in the last 6 years, and taken the stances that I have, and publicly been very active about the Constitution and free speech, and very anti-war, my children are struggling with that compared to the faith that I brought them up in. And I don't know, because none of my kids really are church attenders, some maybe once in a while, but I think there's a struggle for them probably understanding Well, Mom used to go to the church, and the church didn't preach against war and all this other stuff that now she's taken a strong stance on. I think they probably question that. But I think, exercising my conscience stronger now at this point in my life than I ever have before.
I think so.
And I think that's the part that matters.
How about you?
Well,
Did you use it?
did I use that? No, I don't think so. But I do know that I looked for a family that I thought was, had some basic Christian values. So,
It's a tough line to walk.
yeah.
You don't want to tell your children that none of this has any value. None of the what you call mythology has any value, because it has value. It has a lot of value. And I have to say that Christianity as a foundation for a culture could be worse, could be a worse foundation than Christianity, as long as you keep examining yourself and you don't ever fall into thinking that Christianity means my prejudices beat yours, they're better than yours because I'm a Christian.
Can I comment?
Yes, please do.
I would agree that it is a better foundation than what could be worse. But that's not an argument for continuing to raise generations of kids to believe that there's some kind of a divine plan that's gonna solve climate change.
Yes, well, I certainly don't think anyone here would do that.
It's time to have that doctor back from,
Dr. Abraham?
yes, back
Yes.
from St. Thomas.
Yes, he gave us a very good program
Climatologist,
on-
very savvy individual about that. Right about now would be a good time to have him back in the next 6 months.
Right?
Well, we need to start pulling ourselves together here. I think we've had a very good program, and even though it didn't hew to a really good central cause, I still think that we got some territory covered, and I think we made some really good progress toward understanding and respecting everyone at this table even more than we did before.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
I hope that I did not insult anybody.
No, you were very careful not to.
I tried not to because I got a go home with one.
So,
As soon as he turns the mic off, I'll let it go.
well, I want to thank our guests once more, Herb Davis and Retha Dooley and Robin Hensel. I'm Theresa Skorseth. I think we've got a good start on a long-standing program that we can come back to for more back and forth about myth and reality and ration and reason and faith and the whole nine.
I hope you come back and join us.
I hope so too, absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for watching.